Stop. You haven't subscribed to the channel yet. Subscribe now. We have new stories every day. Now, let's go. The harsh ring of Thomas' phone cut through the darkness of his bedroom like a knife. His consciousness struggled through layers of sleep as he fumbled across the nightstand, knocking over a glass of water before finding the vibrating device. The screen blazed bright. At 2:17 a.m., an unknown number. The empty space beside him in bed seemed to mock him. Charlotte should have been home hours ago from her weekly book club meeting. She'd left at 7, wearing a new blouse he'd never seen before, a trace of unfamiliar perfume trailing in her wake. "Don't wait up," she called over her shoulder, the front door closing with a final click. "Hello." His voice emerged rough with sleep, his throat tight with unexplained dread. "Is this Thomas Crawford?" The male voice on the other end was professional, controlled with an undercurrent of tension that made Thomas' pulse quicken. "Speaking." Thomas sat up straighter, sleep falling away like a discarded blanket. "This is Officer Stephen Parker with the Metropolitan Police Department." The officer paused, and Thomas could hear the careful selection of words that followed. "Sir, I'm calling about your wife, Charlotte Crawford. There's been an incident." Thomas' fingers gripped the phone tighter. "What kind of incident? Is she hurt?" "She's been found in a concerning condition at the Pine Grove Motel on Hamilton Street. Emergency services have transported her to Memorial Hospital. You should come right away." The Pine Grove Motel. Thomas' mind raced, trying to make sense of the information. That was across town, nowhere near where her book club supposedly met. What was she doing there? "I understand you have questions, Mr. Crawford, but I can't provide more details over the phone. The emergency room staff will brief you when you arrive." Officer Parker's tone remained carefully neutral, but something in it made Thomas' stomach clench. Static crackled at the edges of the call. Thomas switched on the bedside lamp. Warm light flooded the master bedroom, their bedroom, and his eyes fell on the framed photos dotting the dresser. Their wedding day 8 years ago, Charlotte radiant in white. A vacation in Hawaii 3 years back, both of them laughing on the beach. Recent snapshots showed subtle changes he tried to ignore. Charlotte's new highlights, the designer clothes, the way her smile seemed more practiced than genuine. While pulling on jeans and a sweater, fragments of memories from the past year surfaced. Charlotte's phone always face down on tables, the way she angled her laptop screen away when he entered her home office. Those urgent work emails that always seemed to arrive during dinner. The yoga studio membership she insisted on, despite the one closer to their house having better reviews. He had dismissed each red flag, trusted her completely. What kind of fool was he? The drive to Memorial Hospital seemed both endless and too quick. The streets were nearly empty at this hour, streetlights casting intermittent shadows across his face as he gripped the steering wheel. He barely noticed running a yellow light, his thoughts consumed by that single word. Motel. Thomas pulled into the hospital parking lot, tires crunching over loose gravel as he took the first available space. The emergency room entrance loomed ahead, its fluorescent glare harsh against the pre-dawn darkness. His footsteps echoed in the quiet lot as he rushed toward the sliding doors. Inside, the reception area assaulted his senses with its sharp antiseptic smell and buzzing fluorescent lights. A nurse looked up from her station, her name tag identifying her as Grace. She had kind eyes and crow's feet that deepened as she noted his distress. "Can I help you?" she asked, fingers already poised over her keyboard. "My wife," Thomas managed, his voice hoarse. "Charlotte Crawford. The police called about her." Recognition flickered across Nurse Grace's features, followed by something that looked uncomfortably like pity. "Yes, Mr. Crawford, please have a seat. Dr. Wilson will be out to speak with you shortly." "I'd rather stand." Thomas began pacing the waiting room, his shoes squeaking against the freshly waxed floor. The space was nearly empty at this hour, just an elderly man dozing in a corner chair, his chin tucked against his chest, and a young mother cradling a feverish toddler. The minutes crawled by like hours. Thomas checked his phone repeatedly, though he knew it wouldn't show any messages from Charlotte. Her last text had been at 6:45 p.m. Heading to book club. Don't wait up. The casual deception of it made his jaw clench. The double doors leading to the treatment areas swung open, and a tall man in surgical scrubs emerged. His ID badge read Dr. James Wilson, Chief of Surgery. Mr. Crawford? Yes, that's me. Thomas stepped forward, studying the doctor's face for clues. How's Charlotte? What happened to her? Dr. Wilson gestured toward a more private corner of the waiting room, away from the other patients. His expression was carefully composed, professional, but there was an awkwardness in his manner that set Thomas' nerves on edge. Your wife is in surgery right now, Dr. Wilson began, keeping his voice low. We're working to remove a... He paused, clearly uncomfortable, a foreign object that's become lodged internally. It's a delicate procedure, but she's stable. Foreign object. Thomas' mouth went dry. What exactly are you talking about? Dr. Wilson shifted his weight, his discomfort obvious now. I'm afraid I can't provide more specific details at this time. What's important is that we're addressing the immediate medical concern. Officer Parker would like to speak with you about the circumstances of your wife's admission. As if on cue, a police officer approached them. He was younger than Thomas had expected from their phone conversation, maybe early 30s, with a boyish face that seemed at odds with his serious expression. Mr. Crawford. Officer Parker extended his hand. If I could have a moment of your time. Thomas shook the offered hand mechanically, noting the officer's firm grip and the way his other hand rested near his weapon. A habitual stance, probably, but it added to the surreal quality of the moment. There are some details about the situation you need to be aware of, Parker continued, leading Thomas a few steps away from Dr. Wilson. Your wife was found in room 114 at the Pine Grove Motel. The establishment's security cameras recorded another individual leaving the room in a hurry shortly before we received the 911 call. Thomas felt bile rise in his throat. Another individual. A male subject, approximately 6 feet tall, athletic build. The footage isn't clear enough for positive identification, but we're working on enhancing it. Parker paused, choosing his next words carefully. The room showed clear signs of intimate activity. The fluorescent lights suddenly seemed too bright. The antiseptic smell too strong. Thomas leaned against the wall, his legs unsteady. The past year of small doubts and dismissed suspicions crashed over him like a tidal wave. I want to see her, he said abruptly, pushing away from the wall. Now, sir, she's in surgery. Dr. Wilson started to protest, but Thomas was already moving toward the operating room doors, his feet carrying him forward as if possessed. Mr. Crawford, you can't go in there. Nurse Grace called after him, but he ignored her, bursting through the doors into the surgical wing. The corridor stretched before him, doors labeled or 1, or 2, or 3. Through the small window in the third door, he could see a cluster of medical personnel in surgical gowns and masks. In the center of their attention lay Charlotte, unconscious on the operating table. Before anyone could stop him, Thomas pushed through the door. The scene that greeted him would be forever branded in his memory. Charlotte's pale face, partially hidden behind an oxygen mask, her body draped in blue surgical sheets, and there in the surgeon's hands, the unmistakable shape of what they were working to remove. A massive object. Its presence was a grotesque confirmation of his worst fears. Sir, you cannot be in here. A nurse tried to block his view, but it was too late. Dr. Catherine, the assisting surgeon, rushed to usher him out. Mr. Crawford, please, she insisted, her voice firm, but kind behind her surgical mask. We need to maintain a sterile environment. Your wife's safety depends on it. Thomas allowed himself to be led back to the waiting room, his mind numb with shock and revulsion. He collapsed into a chair, the vinyl squeaking beneath him, and buried his face in his hands. The wedding ring on his finger felt like it was burning his skin. Through the large windows of the waiting room, He could see the first hints of dawn breaking over the city. The night sky was shifting from black to deep blue, stars fading as morning approached. Thomas sat rigid in his chair, every muscle tense with anger and betrayal. And in the growing light, his resolve hardened like steel. He would uncover everything. Every lie, every deception, every moment of infidelity. There would be no room for excuses, no possibility of forgiveness. As the sun began to rise, Thomas Crawford made a silent vow. His wife would regret the day she decided to betray him. Morning sunlight crept through the hospital window, casting long shadows across the sterile room. Thomas sat in an uncomfortable vinyl chair, watching Charlotte's unconscious form on the bed. The rhythmic beeping of monitors provided a steady backdrop to his churning thoughts. His wedding ring felt heavy on his finger, a weight that seemed to mock 8 years of trust and devotion. The surgery had ended 2 hours ago. Dr. Wilson had assured him it was successful, though his carefully neutral tone couldn't hide the awkwardness of the situation. Now Thomas waited, his mind replaying every suspicious moment from the past year through the lens of his new knowledge. A slight change in Charlotte's breathing pattern drew his attention. Her eyelids fluttered, fingers twitching against the white hospital sheets. Thomas leaned forward, his expression hardening as he prepared for the confrontation he'd been rehearsing in his mind. Charlotte's eyes opened slowly, confusion clouding their blue depths as she took in her surroundings. The moment she registered Thomas's presence, fear flashed across her features, quickly followed by shame. Thomas. Her voice was raw, barely above a whisper. The oxygen monitor on her finger trembled as she reached toward him. What happened? That's what I'd like to know. Thomas's voice could have frozen the summer air coming through the window. Why don't you tell me about your evening at book club? Charlotte's fingers clutched at the thin hospital blanket, knuckles white against the pale fabric. I don't. Her brow furrowed. Everything's fuzzy. Let me help clear things up for you. Thomas leaned forward, his gaze drilling into hers. Room 114. Pine Grove Motel. Ring any bells? The color drained from Charlotte's face. A tear slid down her cheek as the memories visibly crashed over her. Thomas, please. Who is he? The question hung between them like an executioner's blade. The steady beep of the heart monitor increased its pace, betraying Charlotte's rising panic. His name is Andrew, she finally whispered, each word seeming to physically pain her. Her fingers worried at the edge of the blanket, unable to meet Thomas's gaze. I met him at Radiance Yoga Studio 6 months ago. 6 months. Thomas's voice was deadly quiet. 6 months of lying to my face. 6 months of betraying everything we built together. It wasn't supposed to happen. Charlotte's words tumbled out in a desperate rush. Her hands fluttered like trapped birds as she tried to explain. We were just friends at first. He was my instructor, and we'd talk after class. He understood things about me, about what I wanted. Spare me the romantic details of your seduction. Thomas cut her off, disgust evident in every word. I want his full name. Now. Andrew Mitchell. Charlotte wiped her tears with shaking hands, smearing her mascara further. He teaches the advanced classes. Thomas's jaw clenched. What happened that night? And don't lie to me. Not anymore. Charlotte hesitated, her breath hitching. We tried something new. He pushed me to. Her voice cracked. When it went wrong, he left me there. Alone. Of course he did. Thomas stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the linoleum floor. The sound made Charlotte flinch. That's what happens when you let someone use you like a cheap toy. That's not fair. Charlotte's voice rose with desperation, cracking on the last word. I made a mistake, yes, but... A mistake. Thomas's laugh was hollow, echoing off the sterile walls. A mistake is forgetting to pick up milk. A mistake is missing a deadline. What you did was make a choice. Every time you lied about where you were going. Every time you met him. Every time you let him touch you. Those were choices, Charlotte. Deliberate, conscious choices to destroy our marriage. A nurse appeared in the doorway, drawn by their raised voices. Is everything all right in here? Fine. Thomas snapped, not taking his eyes off Charlotte. Just having a conversation with my wife about her extracurricular activities. The nurse hesitated, looking between them before reluctantly withdrawing. Her footsteps echoed down the hallway, leaving them alone with the weight of their crumbling marriage. Thomas pulled out his phone, holding it up like evidence in a trial. Where's your phone, Charlotte? Her eyes widened, panic replacing the tears. What? Your phone. The one you're always guarding like it contains state secrets. The one you never leave unattended. Where is it? I think the police have it. Charlotte's voice was small, defeated. They took my belongings when the ambulance brought me in. Thomas was already striding toward the door, his purpose clear. In the hallway, he found Officer Parker talking with a nurse at the station. The young officer straightened as Thomas approached, clearly reading the intent in his expression. I need my wife's phone, Thomas said without preamble. It's evidence of her affair with Andrew Mitchell. Parker's eyebrows rose at the name. She identified him. Yes, he's an instructor at Radiance Yoga. I want to see every message, every photo, every piece of evidence of their relationship. Mr. Crawford. Parker's tone was professional but cautious. The phone is currently logged as evidence in an ongoing investigation. An investigation into what? A consensual affair gone wrong. Thomas's voice was sharp. Or are you actually going to charge him with abandoning her there? Parker studied him for a long moment before nodding slightly. Follow me. They walked in tense silence to a small office where evidence was being processed. Parker retrieved a clear plastic bag containing Charlotte's belongings, her purse, clothing, and the phone with its cracked screen. The passcode, Thomas demanded, taking the phone. 824. Charlotte's weak voice came from the doorway. She stood there in her hospital gown, clutching an IV pole for support. Her face was pale, dark circles under her eyes, making her look ghostly in the fluorescent lighting. It's your birthday. The irony of her using his birthday as her passcode while betraying him made Thomas's jaw clench so hard he could hear his teeth grind. He entered the numbers, and the phone unlocked to reveal a messaging app open to a conversation with him. What he found made bile rise in his throat. Months of messages, each one a new betrayal. Miss you already. Can't wait until Thursday's book club meeting. Last night was amazing. I love how you make me feel so free. Your husband's really working late again. His loss is my gain. Pictures followed, each one driving the knife deeper. Charlotte in lingerie he'd never seen. Intimate photos clearly meant for Andrew's eyes. Selfies of them together, both glowing with satisfaction. But the worst were the messages mocking him. Thomas's hands shook with rage as he scrolled through month after month of betrayal. I'm taking screenshots of everything, he told Officer Parker, his voice tight with controlled fury. I want it all documented for my lawyer. Of course. Parker's tone was carefully neutral. Thomas nodded curtly and pulled out his own phone, dialing a number he'd hoped never to need. Jim. It's Thomas Crawford. I need you to draw up divorce papers. Immediately. Charlotte sobbed from the doorway, her frail form trembling against the IV pole. Divorce? She whispered, her voice barely audible over the hum of hospital machinery. Thomas, please. We can work through this. I'll go to counseling. I'll do anything you want. Please, don't throw away 8 years of marriage. I didn't throw it away. Thomas's voice was razor sharp as he turned to face her. You did. With every lie. Every secret meeting. Every time you chose him over me. It wasn't like that. Charlotte's voice cracked as fresh tears spilled down her cheeks. What Andrew and I had. It wasn't real. It was just physical. You're my husband. I love you. Love. Thomas spat the word like poison. Is that what you call it? Letting another man touch you. Laughing with him about deceiving me. Sharing intimate details of our marriage with a stranger. I'm sorry. Charlotte sobbed, her legs trembling beneath her hospital gown. "I'm so sorry. Please, Thomas, give me another chance. We can fix this. We can go to marriage counseling. Start over. Start over." Thomas's laugh was bitter. "And what will we build it on, Charlotte? More lies. More deception. The foundation of our marriage is gone. You destroyed it. Piece by piece. Every time you met him in that motel room." "It was a mistake," she pleaded, tears streaming down her face. "The biggest mistake of my life. I'll never see him again. I promise. I'll quit yoga, change my number. Anything you want. What I want." Thomas stepped closer, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "What I want is my wife back. The woman I trusted completely. The woman I would have died for. But she's gone, isn't she? If she ever existed at all." Charlotte swayed on her feet, the color draining from her face. A nurse rushed forward to steady her, shooting Thomas a disapproving look. "She needs to rest," the nurse said firmly. "This conversation can wait." "No, it can't." Thomas straightened his jacket, his expression cold. "Because there is no more conversation to have. All communication goes through my lawyer from now on." He turned to Officer Parker. "I trust you'll get my wife's statement about her encounter with Mr. Mitchell." Parker nodded, his professional mask firmly in place. "We'll be conducting a full investigation into the incident." "Good." Thomas's voice was clipped. "Send any relevant documentation to my lawyer's office. Jim Davidson at Davidson and Associates. He'll be handling everything from here on out." "Thomas, please." Charlotte's voice was barely a whisper now. "Don't leave like this. Don't let it end this way." He paused in the doorway, not turning to look at her. "You ended it, Charlotte. Every time you walked into that motel room. Every time you lied to my face. Every time you let him touch you. This is just making it official." The sound of her collapse behind him. The nurses rushing to help, the monitors beeping in alarm. None of it made him turn back. The woman he loved was already gone, replaced by a stranger who had betrayed him in the worst possible way. There would be no forgiveness, no reconciliation, no second chances. As he stepped into the elevator, Charlotte's broken sobs echoed down the hallway. He let the doors close between them, as final as the death of their marriage. Morning sunlight streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Davidson and Associates, casting long shadows across the mahogany conference table where Thomas sat reviewing the final divorce settlement. The thick stack of papers before him represented the death of his marriage, each page outlining the precise terms of its dissolution. Jim Davidson, his attorney, sat across from him, radiating satisfaction as he adjusted his wire-rimmed glasses. The morning light caught the silver in his temples, highlighting the experience etched in the lines around his eyes. He'd earned every one of those lines fighting battles like this. "I have to admit, Thomas," Jim began, his tone carrying a note of professional pride. "This is one of the cleanest victories I've seen in 20 years of divorce law. The infidelity clause in your prenup was ironclad, and the evidence we gathered was overwhelming." Thomas's fingers traced the edge of the settlement papers. "Break it down for me, Jim. I want to hear every detail." "Of course." Jim pulled out a summary sheet, his Mont Blanc pen tapping each point as he explained. "First, the house. It's yours, free and clear. Charlotte's name has been removed from the deed. The same goes for both vehicles and all investment accounts." "What about her claim to my law firm shares?" "Denied completely." The judge was particularly unsympathetic, given the circumstances. Jim shuffled through more papers. "She keeps only what she brought into the marriage, her personal effects, her pre-marriage savings, and her car. Everything acquired during the marriage goes to you, as per the prenup's infidelity clause." Thomas nodded, his expression remaining carefully neutral. "And the medical bills?" "Her responsibility entirely." The judge actually cited her reckless behavior as justification for not requiring you to contribute. Jim allowed himself a small smile. The hospital incident really worked in our favor. A knock at the door interrupted them. "Patricia, Jim's longtime secretary, entered carrying a thick manila envelope. "The final divorce decree just arrived from Judge Henderson's office," she announced, placing it carefully on the table. "And Mr. Crawford, there's a detective here to see you about the Mitchell case." Thomas exchanged glances with Jim, who nodded. "Send him in, Patricia." Detective Marcus Reed entered, his weathered face bearing the tired expression of someone who'd seen too much of humanity's darker side. He carried a leather portfolio under one arm and declined the offered seat with a shake of his head. "Mr. Crawford, Mr. Davidson." He acknowledged them both. "I wanted to deliver this update in person. Andrew Mitchell accepted a plea deal this morning." Thomas's hands flattened against the table. "What are the terms?" 3 years, with possibility of parole after 18 months, mandatory counseling, and registration as a sex offender. Reed pulled out some paperwork. "The DA pushed hard after we uncovered similar complaints from other students at the yoga studio." "Other complaints?" Thomas's voice carried a dangerous edge. Reed nodded grimly. 3 other women came forward after your wife's case went public, all with similar stories. Mitchell using his position as an instructor to initiate relationships, pushing boundaries, engaging in increasingly risky behavior. "In the studio," Jim interjected, shuddering. "Shuddered as of yesterday. Their insurance dropped them when the pattern of incidents came to light." Reed's expression hardened. "Mitchell won't be teaching yoga to anyone for a very long time." Thomas absorbed this information, his jaw working silently. "What about Charlotte's statement? Did she cooperate?" "Fully," Reed confirmed. "Her testimony was crucial to the plea deal. She provided detailed accounts of how Mitchell gradually escalated their encounters, pressured her into more extreme acts, then abandoned her when things went wrong that night." A muscle twitched in Thomas's cheek. "Did she mention how willing she was? How she laughed with him about deceiving me?" "Mr. Crawford," Reed's tone was professional but sympathetic, "I understand your anger, but your wife was also a victim of Mitchell's manipulation." "Ex-wife," Thomas corrected coldly. "As of today, she's my ex-wife." Reed nodded in acknowledgement. "Of course. Well, that's all I needed to share. The DA's office will send formal documentation for your records." After the detective left, Thomas stared at the divorce decree. Its gold seal gleamed in the morning light. 8 years of marriage reduced to legal terminology and property divisions. Jim hesitated. "Charlotte's lawyer contacted me this morning. She's in serious financial difficulty." Thomas's expression didn't change. "Explain." "The medical bills alone are over $50,000. Then there's her legal fees, lost wages from the yoga studio closure." Jim spread his hands. "She's facing bankruptcy." "Not my concern." Jim nodded. "No, it's not." Thomas glanced at his phone. A text from an unknown number. "Andrew Mitchell. I'm heading to jail tomorrow. I know you hate me, but please look after Charlotte. What happened wasn't all her fault." Thomas blocked the number without responding. Let them deal with their guilt and regrets. He was done with both of them. The drive home took him past the yoga studio where it had all started. The windows were dark now, a for lease sign hanging prominently in the front. Another casualty of choices and consequences. His new apartment building rose ahead, all glass, steel, and modernity. No memories haunted these halls. No ghosts of betrayal lurked in the corners. The doorman nodded as Thomas entered, taking the private elevator to the penthouse level. Inside, floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the city. Thomas poured himself a scotch and watched the sun setting over the urban landscape. On his finger, the tan line where his wedding ring had been was finally fading. His phone buzzed again. An email from Jim. Final paperwork filed. Charlotte's lawyer says she's moving to Seattle next week. Clean break, fresh start for everyone. Thomas deleted the email without reply. Seattle might as well be another planet. Distance wouldn't change what had happened, wouldn't erase the betrayal that had reshaped him. The city lights began to twinkle on as darkness fell. Thomas raised his glass in a silent toast to lessons learned and bridges burned. The man he'd been had died in that hospital room, watching surgeons extract the physical evidence of his wife's infidelity. The man who emerged was stronger for the pain, wiser for the betrayal. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities, new beginnings. But tonight, Thomas stood alone in his fortress of glass and steel, finally free of the weight of love and trust and all the wounds they brought with them. Let Charlotte and Andrew carry the burden of their guilt. Let them face the consequences of their choices. Thomas Crawford had emerged from the ashes of his marriage transformed, not bitter, but harder, not broken, but reinvented. The city spread out before him like a field of stars, full of possibilities. For the first time since that late-night phone call had shattered his world, Thomas felt truly, completely free. Thanks to everyone who took the time to listen to today's stories. If you enjoyed it, please consider liking and subscribing if you haven't already. Feel free to share your thoughts on the events in the comments below. Take care.